Okay, it's been recorded, so let's crack on because we've got so much great content to fit in. Excuse me if my eyes keep diverting from my camera, it's because I'm sharing the screen. So I'm just going to advance through some slides beautifully put together by Sam Catlin. So let's meet the team. That's Sam there. That's Sam Catlin, who puts together a lot of the graphics. The rest of the team here. There's always space for more people if you're interested in getting involved. So that is a good opportunity. We meet once every 2 weeks, and it's not a big onerous task because we all do the heavy lifting. So together it's pretty good. Here are some links. The deck will be shared on Slack. So if you haven't got a chance to write those down, don't worry, you'll be able to click on them from Slack. Said about getting involved, you know, it's pretty good. We're a fun-loving bunch of people, so it won't be a waste of your time. Oh, there we go. I must have rehearsed this or something. So yeah, about 4 hours a month to do the organising. We involve friends and relatives and anyone that we can drum up for the speaking. So leveraging your network is a good thing. And we have people that can provide the Zoom links, etc. Okay, so becoming part of the community is important because we want to spread the word. And there's a few of us that are towards the end of our careers, and we just want to help share some of our experiences and knowledge so that everyone can get the most out of the mainframe community. We've got people attending today from all over the world, which is pretty exciting, you know, for a free meetup event. So thank you for spending time to register and join us. So today I've got Joe Winchester, IBM and open source guru, Vaughn Marshall, who is product manager for the industry-leading version control solution on the mainframe Endeavour, and myself, I work at BMC, so 3 major vendors represented, but today we are sharing our experiences. But before that, Matt Comer, drum roll please, for who wants to be a zillionaire, because that's where 64-bit processing gets you, right? So Matt, are you going to take it away?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
You're audible.
Brilliant. So welcome everyone. Thank you. So this is a little warm up, a quick icebreaker before we get on to the real part of the evening or day. I'm just going to share my screen. So this is a quiz. Hopefully it will take no more than 10 minutes. And for that, you will need your mobile phones or some other device to connect into. Right. Ooh. Can you see my screen okay? Can people see my screen okay? Brilliant, fantastic. So to play this game, it's just a bit of fun, just to warm us up. There's going to be 7 questions. If you've got a phone or a tablet, if you could go to menti.com and enter the code on the screen, we'll start shortly. So it's just a bit of fun. They're mostly multiple choice questions about the mainframe and the fastest fingers. So we're calling it Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It's not really anything to do with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It's just a bit of fun. There's some abbreviations, some conundrums, a range of just silly questions. So I'm trying to see how many people we have got that have joined. I'm just going to wait another about 30 seconds. I've got my son coming into the room now, so he is about to distract me. Right, so I am going to make a start on the quiz. I hope you've got access. If you haven't, you can join once we've started. So we have 19, 20 players ready. This is brilliant. 21. Right, we're going to make a start just in the interest of time. Fastest fingers, the more points you get, the quicker you are. So let's go with question 1. Hopefully you'll pick it up as we go. So can you unravel this conundrum? So if you look at your phone, you will see an anagram, and we want to know what is that an anagram of. I've just shepherded my son out of the room, so hopefully he's not going to be a distraction. So if you were able to answer that, the correct answer was Mainframers. Oh, so Bethany takes a lead here with 938 points. Well done, Bethany. Well done, everyone else who got that right. Question 2. We're just going to go straight into it. This is another anagram. Can you unravel this conundrum? What is this mainframe term? So hopefully on your device, you'll be able to have something you can input in. I think we've got 8 people answering. 9 have answered. So the correct answer was assembler. Oh, apologies if you misspelt that. That would have been me. So in terms of the leaderboard, it looks like Marcus was the quickest that time. And there's the revised leaderboard. I'm guessing that's Ezreal at the top. Brilliant, well done. Question 3. What does ISPF stand for? Now, I didn't actually know this. So you need to scroll down on your device to see the answers to what to vote. Hopefully they'll be color coded correctly. So it's an A, B, C, or D. Blue for A, pink for B, red for C, orange for D. Everyone has voted. Wow, so 5 people got the correct answer there, and I can't even recall what it was. But well done to those who did get it right. Oh, well done again, Ezreal. Bethany is back in 2nd place as the fastest. Drew, well done in 3rd. Question 4. This is where I need to speed up so that we get to the main purpose of this evening. What does JES stand for? So another relatively famous mainframe abbreviation. Job entry subsystem, job entry system, Java entry system, or job extended system. Everyone has voted. Well done for voting. Oh. So is that Stupot answered the fastest there? Well done to Stupot. The leaderboard is very similar at the top. So 3 questions left. This is where I need some music. Let's see if I've got some on my phone. Which product was released first? Kix or IMS? Again, you need to scroll down to see the options. So we have 16 people that have answered, 17 have answered. So well done to those that guessed IMS. It was, I think, a couple of years before, according to Wikipedia. And the fastest this time is AB. Well done to AB. guessing that's Alan. So, penultimate question. What is the mainframe abbreviation? So here we've got missing vowels. Can you work out what this famous mainframe abbreviation would be? So you need to add the vowels into the words. One person has voted, I think. So the correct answer is EBCDIC. Now, I hope I even had that correct. I'm surprised only 2 people got that right. So well done to Avinash. My apologies if that was a mistake on my part. So now we have the final question. So the suspense, who's going to win our icebreaker? Name the mainframe product. One of these. Hopefully you recognize one of the pictures there. Okay, so the correct answer was ZOWE. The quickest that time was AB. And we have a winner. Avinash, huge congratulations. Well done. Thank you very much for joining. For those who participated, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
It's a bit of fun. Right, Stuart, back to you.
Yeah, it's good that you finished on ZOWE, because ZOWE is open source. So let's get back to the agenda. Joe's going to give an intro to open source. I've got the deck, Joe, and I can do the next slide malarkey. And then, having had an intro to open source, we're going to then hear about software bill of materials and policy as code, because we need to make sure that the supply chain is not corrupted anyway with open source. And I'm your host, Stuart Ashby. Right. So we're then going to finish, if there's time, with an open mic. And there's also going to be a promotion of calendar, not just for our events, but things that are mainframe related. And we love your feedback. So there's a Survey Monkey survey for people to complete to tell us how to get better. Fantastic. So here we go. Oops, let's get it onto the, there we go. Right, so Joe Winchester, over to you. What's that? What am I looking at?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, it's pretty. You asked me for one slide, and it's actually a slide with 17 bits of animation. So I'm not. Thanks for not counting it as 17 slides. Yeah. So how long do I have, Stuart? You said you keep a track on time.
You got it's 17:44. Need to be finished by 10 to 6 our time.
Yeah, will be. Thanks. So it's really good to talk about open source. So I remember the first open source tool that I ever worked on, the first open source language, which was Java. I remember going to the first Java 1 conference, and James Gosling, who's one of the kind of fathers of Java when it was part of Sun Microsystems. I think it was an internal project called Oak originally. He said, you know, the least interesting thing and the most interesting thing about Java is it's open source. And he then gave a really good analogy. He said when he traveled around the world, the countries that were nice countries, and stop me if I go too political here, but it's 2023 and it's late in the evening here. And I've just come back from Norway and Oslo, are democratic countries, but they're countries where you walk around a beautiful country like, I don't know, Sweden or Wales. I see Marcus is here. And they have good healthcare. Everybody's sort of happy. They have low crime. You know, they have good political systems, very low corruption rates and so forth. They're democratic countries where people who live there can contribute to the you know, to the general well-being of everybody within that country, and that works very, very well. And James Gosling said when he goes to parts of the world where he doesn't see that, is they don't have democracy. And he said open source is a little bit like democracy, is it gives you transparency and visibility to what's going on, but also, as we'll possibly hear later from Vaughn, it carries risks associated with it as well. And how do you govern that process and make sure that you know, it remains grounded in you know, the principles behind it. End of politics. So this particular slide, we'll hear a little bit about today. So that's the Z16 in the middle. And if you can just, so the Z16 runs a ZOS operating system, formerly the sort of MVS operating system. And generally, I think you've got a little bit of, there we go. So generally the languages that run within that are, I'd like to call them legacy languages or heritage languages. It doesn't mean that they're not relevant today. It just means they're older languages. So COBOL, PL1, high-level assembly, obviously C runs in the LE environment as well. And they tend to be controlled by older things like, you know, JCL and Rex, although Rex is actually cross-platform. Coming forwards, thanks for clicking it. Then I think it's around the 1990s, I think around 1998 when Unix System Services was first introduced, because that's the kind of alternative kind of universe, the kind of non-mainframe universe is really geared around operating systems like Unix. And if you just click on the next advance, so I've talked a little bit about Java. What's interesting about Unix System Services, it introduces a new file system that sort of mimics what non-mainframe platforms do, what sometimes call us a hierarchical file system. We're not dealing with fixed blocks and things that are really just the kind of, you know, the grandchildren of punch card languages, really. One more box. What's interesting about Java is it's open source, but the most interesting thing about Java is it's packages, right? You have jar files, you bind jar files together to make a larger application, maybe an EAR file or a WAR file, or you can just run it locally. But what's interesting is, where do you source those extra jar files from? Some of them you might create, but some of them might be created by somebody else. So Java's a package manager, it gets things from Maven and Gradle. How do you control that? If you have open source software coming in that somebody else puts in there, what license is it coming in there? We'll hear a little bit about that later. Newer languages running on the Unix System Services. Java is provided by IBM. When you get ZOS, you get Java on it. These ones you have to source additionally. But a lot of non-mainframe software, not only is it written in Java, it's written in packages like Node, Python, and Golang, things like that. They all have package registries as well. Node Package Manager, Python pip, you know, the Go one as well. So we'll probably hear later from Vaughn. How do you control and throttle that input? Just like democracy, when you count the ballot papers, how do you know they're genuine? How do you know they haven't been tampered with and things like that? Then that's the language side of people building applications to run their financial services or whatever it is that they're building for their line of business. What about the IT operations? So again, moving away from JCL and Rex and sort of ISPF and some of the kind of legacy ways to drive the mainframe, for the mainframe to not be seen as a different platform, we've got to blend with the tools that everybody else uses, learns at college or uses the non-mainframe platform. I've listed just a few there. I think that's Tecton, Jenkins. So ZOWE plays a big part in that. One of the really interesting things, and I think it's Jeff Bezos from Amazon, when he talks about open source and the drive that, you know, Amazon and lots of other companies contribute to open source as well. He calls it undifferentiated heavy lifting. If we're going to do things in a collaborative way so that vendors don't have to duplicate expensive work and users have the freedom to move between vendor software, and for very complicated things like single sign-on and, you know, perhaps collecting logs and traces so different people can feed together, it's very good to have open source. ZOWE is a very good open source project that I'm lucky to be part of from IBM. There's a group called the Open Mainframe Project that actually is a kind of umbrella organization. It's part of the Linux Foundation, and Galassa is a really great open source project. Maybe we can talk about that later. It's a very new one to do with testing. And there's also CBT tape, just to show that CBT tape is also, so we're not leaving behind people do that. And there's some really great applications. The next animation that you called is within people using, there's some really great tools that the open source community have created. And I've just listed a few there. So Git clients, Vim, Bash, curl, Perl, and these aren't provided natively on Unix system services, they have to be ported to Unix system services. And a couple of things I'd like to touch on later. So there are people who do those ports. Just click the next button, Stuart. So for example, ZOS Open Tools, I think Igor's on the call. It'd be great if people ask questions about those. And then also Rocket. Rocket is a great software vendor who have port a lot of those tools to the mainframe. So if you're interested in running Ant or running curl and you don't have it, you can go look at Rocket sites and they've ported some of those tools. Vim, and I just installed Bash recently, just last week. ZOS Open Tools, just Google for that. They've got some great ports. Another click, Stuart, and I think I've got couple of last ones. Ansible, I'm an IBMer, so most IBMers that you talk to, especially if they're trying to sell you something, especially because IBM acquired Red Hat, and Red Hat have a very good distribution of Ansible. Ansible is a great open source tool, and maybe we can talk about that later if people are interested in finding out about Ansible. And I had one more thing I was going to show, maybe that I lost the one. Z-Linux, yeah, at the top of that slide, let's not forget Z-Linux. The mainframe has done really, really well recently with the Z-Linux. So unlike Unix system services, which is not really a Unix shell, Z-Linux is a proper Linux environment, running on the kind of what used to be the CMOS, now the Talon processor in the Z16. And there's some distributions. I've listed a few there: Red Hat, Enterprise Linux, SUSE Linux, and Ubuntu. And I just checked with Liz Joseph this morning, and there's more. There's Debian, there's Fedora, and others as well. And there's some phenomenal tools, or something called the software discovery tool that lets you see what open source packages don't have to be ported to run under USS, which can obviously interact with the ZOS environment. It can read, it works with the SAFDB database, and the LE environment can talk directly through to data sets and things like that. But the Linux environment, also, there's a lot of very great stuff that can be run there from the open source community that, again, has very good, it can just run standalone, or it has a very good pipeline to get through into ZOS. There's a very good hybrid cloud story. How was that, Stuart?
Perfect. Just the 3
Excellent.
minutes over, but that's okay. You've been supported in the chat by lots of URLs. So everything you talked about, someone's been from the different people have been popping stuff in. So we're going to hear more from Joe in a few minutes, but now we're moving over to Vaughn Marshall, who is going to take control of the
yes, I am.
screen. Got it?
Can you hear me, and can you see this?
We're seeing, that's it. Perfect.
Beautiful. Okay, well, welcome everyone. So what I was going to do, hopefully as quickly as Joe was able to move through things, I am going to talk to everybody here about software supply chain security, and in particular, something called an SBOM, which you may or may not have heard of. But first, just my usual disclaimer, this is all informational purposes, but we won't dwell on that. Before I get started, what I wanted to do to kind of illustrate what is driving some of this is a little bit of a story around real world supply chains. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a tragic story. If you're as old as me, you may remember in the 70s and early 80s, there was a time when you would buy things and they didn't have those little plastic or foil wrappers on the bottles themselves. That would came to be known as a safety seal. So if you went and got a bottle of Tylenol, you'd just open it up and there would be your Tylenol. So what had happened, unfortunately, is that somewhere in the early 80s, there was a bad actor who was going around lacing Tylenol with cyanide. And basically, he had corrupted the supply chain for Tylenol by getting in between the end consumer of the product and the producer of the product, Johnson & Johnson. They never caught them, but it did unfortunately lead to a number of deaths. And as a result, there was a massive recall of Tylenol all across the country. And basically it resulted in them looking at, what could they do to enhance the supply chain. And in the end, what did they do? They came up with this concept of a safety seal. And the idea here is that seal, if you opened up a bottle of Tylenol and you saw that it had been messed with, maybe there was a hole poked in it or somebody had pulled it off, you would know that bottle had been compromised by a third party. So that was an unfortunate history lesson, but unfortunately what's happening now is we actually have supply chains in the world of software as well. And bad actors have started pivoting some of their attacks to attacking those supply chains. So if you think about it, what is a software supply chain? We take source code, we take third-party codes, a lot of it open source, some of the pieces that Joe mentioned, and we use build systems and tools, some of them open source as well, and we compile them and turn them into executable applications, and we use our network to put them into repositories and deploy them to live systems. And all of those things, all of those components that are part of that can be considered the supply chain for the software that end users use. So as I mentioned, bad actors have traditionally been attacking applications themselves, and while that necessarily hasn't stopped, they've also noted that a great way to amplify attacks is to attack the supply chain itself. So some recent high-profile example, SolarWinds, where a bad actor was able to compromise a DLL that was then used in a tool that was part of the supply chain for many applications, and use that as a backdoor into tons of organizations. Another one that's recent was Log4j. There was a vulnerability that was in some very commonly used open source tools, and once that vulnerability was discovered, that became something that was used in many different attacks. Or sorry, not many different attacks, but many different applications, and therefore made those applications vulnerable. Anyways, the net is because of this new attack vector, governments have gotten involved, and governments around the world are calling for adoption of more resilient supply chains. So the UK is doing this. The famous one in the US is the executive order from Joe Biden on improving the nation's cybersecurity. And essentially what these directives are doing is compelling businesses to look at their supply chains and adopt new standards for securing them. And of course, right now they are, we'll say advice or recommendations, best practices, but in future it's looking like much of this will be legislated. For instance, in the US right now, if you want to sell software to the US government, you're going to need to be able to adhere to some of the standards they're introducing. So let's talk a little bit about what those standards are. So the one that we've called out for today's session is something called an SBOM, or a software bill of materials. And it's very simple in concept. It's very similar to the Tylenol bottle, right? If I go to my Tylenol bottle and let's say there's an inactive ingredient or maybe even a drug in there that I have an allergy to, it'll be on me to look at the ingredients list and verify that nothing in there is going to cause an adverse reaction that might kill me. But the fact that that transparency exists, that list of ingredients says exactly what's in it, and the coupled with the safety seal that was added in 1982 after the problem with the lacing of the Tylenol, that tells me that A, this bottle has not been tampered with, and B, that what the company says is in there, I can trust. Okay, and so that transparency and that verifiability really gives me confidence that this drug, if you will, is safe to consume. So the idea of an SBOM is basically to take that same concept and translate it to software. So there's a number of different formats that have evolved, and they're still evolving. Two big ones, SPDX, CycloneDX. They're essentially machine readable formats that describe what's in software. So that could be lists of third-party ingredients. It could be, third-party software. It could be things like the specs for the build machines and the tools that were used to build it. It could be where the source code came from and so on. And basically, by having that transparency, an organization can validate that they can use the software. So, for instance, I'm a product manager for Endeavor. We ship things that have Java components in it, and we use two pieces in there like Log4j. A person that is consuming Endeavor at an organization, they can look at our SBOM and they can say, they're using Log4j and which version, and they can validate that it's free from vulnerabilities. And in fact, because it's machine readable, that means that I can use open source tools as well as automation to validate that the things in there are still good and safe to consume. So for instance, I may have a piece or a component, a third-party component, open source inside of our software that's in the SBOM that was perfectly well and good, with free of critical vulnerabilities when it was built. But down the road, maybe something gets found, and I want to be able to go back and look and see, is any of the software I'm running, got something that has recently been found to be vulnerable, like a log4j. There's tools out in the open source community as well as the market that let you do this. You can use tools to generate SBOMs. You can use tools to validate SBOMs. You can even use tools to look live into vulnerability databases, and it will point out where critical vulnerabilities and things like that exist. So SBOMs are a key piece of some of these directives around software supply chain security. Another one that is evolving is something called policy automation, and you may have heard the term policy as code. Basically, the idea here is that policies around your software supply chain, whether it's policies on what types of vulnerabilities are acceptable or are acceptable risk, who has to sign off on things, where source code can come from, et cetera, et cetera. Those are validated using policy agents that look at policy metadata or rules and basically determine in an automated fashion whether or not whatever you're working on is allowed to go forward into your live runtime environment according to policy. And the idea here is that you fold this into every stage of your software development lifecycle and you validate it. So these kind of I guess evolving best practices are making their way into the distributed world because of supply chain attacks and things like that. And of course, that means we want Mainframe to participate as well. There's no reason we shouldn't. We run open source on Mainframe just like the distributed world does. And as noted, Mainframe should not be treated any different. So if you've got one enterprise standard that you're following in the distributed world, Mainframe should be able to use and produce things like SBOMs and other metadata that can be integrated into policy governance. In addition, in the world of Mainframe, we've been doing similar sorts of things for many, many years. But by adopting these standards, what it means is that we can start using some of the open source goodness that comes from things like Dependency Track, which is a tool from OWASP that lets you register all of your different SBOMs. And then when things like Log4j fire drills happen where there's vulnerabilities, you just query the database and it shows you exactly where in your organization the vulnerabilities exist so that you can remediate them. The tool Gripe that's listed here, that's the one that looks at the live vulnerability database and tells you, if since something's been built, there's new vulnerabilities and things like that. So I think it very much matters in Mainframe, even if we have our own ways of maintaining integrity, that we fall in line and adopt the same standards that the enterprise does. Just a little plug, if you are a user of Endeavor, we've introduced a tool that is part of our Endeavor package. It doesn't necessarily work exclusively with Endeavor, but it basically allows you to generate SBOMs as part of your builds, or even just as part of any event you want. It works off of tools like Endeavor, but it also can be used to create SBOMs for PTFs. So if you just, or sorry, not PTFs, for PDSs. So if you just have an application runtime location and you want to capture all of the code that's in there, or at least that you think's in there, and have a point in time snapshot, you can do it with this tool as well. And then you can even use this with tools that do software composition analysis on things like Java, and you can combine them into an application SBOM that you can use to understand your footprint and your risk profile. So that is it. Hopefully I managed that in 20 minutes. And if there's questions, I'm sure we'll have an open Q&A where we can talk about some of this in more detail.
Yeah, just don't go anywhere, Vaughn, in case questions do come through. So right now I'm going to take control and go back to Joe Winchester's multiverse of open source tools. And Joe, let's talk about open source, because I've got some concerns, right, about open source, that someone coming from a vendor, closed source vendor thing, if I need support, I've got somewhere to go. What's the deal with open source? How do we go about things like that, do you reckon?
Yeah, Stuart, that's a cracking question. It's a really good question. So and it sort of links in a little bit to some of what Vaughn was touching on, which is you want somebody else to underwrite the provenance of the packages that they've assembled into what, because you as a vendor, when you go to something, you don't go to something and say, I want it to be open source, I want it to be closed source. You just say, I want it to be good, functional, supported. So when it breaks, I want to put it into mission critical software, I want to get some SLAs for it. That's just as relevant for whether you're putting it in your line of business apps, or if it's something like, Ansible or ZOWE command line interface, putting it into your CI/CD pipeline. So in the case of, I'll start with what I know, and then I'll spread out, and hopefully people can fill in the gaps in the chat. With ZOWE, which is open source, you can just go to zowe.org if you want to, and there's an expression, and maybe I'll offend people, it's a British expression, it's called, you can just run with your pants down, right? You can download it from zowe.org and use it, and that's okay. But if you, at some point in time, you're going to want a vendor to support it, there's a couple of models. The Linux Foundation actually are quite good at providing what are called badges, certification badges. It's a bit like, if you're back in the Boy Scouts or the Girls Guide, and you can prove that you can sew or cook or throw an axe or whatever it is based upon where you live, you'll get a little badge proving it. And there's a ZOWE support conformance badge for ZOWE. Anybody can apply for it. If there's a vendor on the call who hasn't and wants to, it's perfectly open and transparent process to do it. And Broadcom have the badge, and I think their Broadcom possibly rebrand it and call it Brightside, and they throw a few other goodies in there as well. Rocket have the badge, and IBM have the badge as well, which is sort of what you would expect. Also, sometimes with open source, so if you look at something like Ansible, which is a fully open source package, you can just download it and run it. If you buy, IBM has a solution probably that is probably branded like Red Hat Ansible, or maybe it's part of Z Mod Stack or something. So generally a vendor's going to underwrite that for you, and that's probably suggested before you start deploying it into some enterprise. Oh, Bryant's on the call. Red Hat Ansible certified content for IBM Z. Thanks, Bryant, for picking that one up. Yeah. So that's generally the progression that I see with customers. They start to fall in love with open source, perhaps, and do it in a test environment, and then before they commit it to production, then they'll get that package from a vendor.
Cool. And
good answer, Stuart?
Yeah, absolutely. So being the end user that wants everything, I'm getting support, and then it doesn't do what I want it to do. I want it to.
Oh, I love where you're leading with these questions. Wow, we should.
I want it to do more, Joe.
You want it to do more. You want to become absolutely, and that's one of the best things. So when I used to work in Eclipse, what I loved when I was at my most productive as a developer, which was probably 15 years ago, before I sort of had kids and lost my hair, it was because I could fix defects that I could see. Right, it was open source. I wasn't behind a vendor, raising PTFs, getting them upvoted, not PTFs, what do you call them? Fit enhancements requests. So I'll talk about ZOWE, and then maybe people from the other communities could interject if they wanted to. Within ZOWE, everything's open source. All the source code is there. If something doesn't work, you can just get a GitHub ID, and you can become a contributor with ideas. So you can just raise an issue and say, you know what, that little feature that's missing, please, can you do it? And within the ZOWE community, what they do is within every program increment or every sprint, they always leave a bit of space to fix what are the most upvoted ones. And then what you can actually do is you can upvote it. So you put little smiley faces or thumbs ups. It somehow gets abused, a little bit like democracy can be abused by the same way as sometimes people go out on social media and say, go on, upvote my issue. But that's all still fair, because at least you can see it if you really wanted to audit it. So you can start contributing ideas. All of the calls are generally in the open, which again makes it very transparent. It's what I call read-write open source rather than just read-only open source. It's democracy where you can vote for more than one candidate, rather than pseudo-democracy where there's only one candidate on the ballot paper. To slap myself down here, otherwise I'm going to offend somebody from North Korea. I don't know what we've got. So I'm just going
It doesn't
slightly
matter,
different.
Joe. Remember, you never talk about religion or politics, and you seem to have done all of that so far. So
Did I talk
good
about
work.
religion? I'm sorry, but the other thing as well, within a lot of open source repos, but you can, especially if it's in GitHub, right? You just do a git clone. You can download, get the whole repo as long as you've got the SSH keys, and you can just create a fork, right? So you can fork it and create a pull request to that fork. So even if, let's say, you found a bug in Node, so I know that the ZOS Open Tools got, and I'm looking at like Bash and Curl, and actually Curl's not one of theirs. Curl Rocket have the port for, but if you look at something like Bash, I think what Ego and the guys have done with that is, rather than them having to create a derivative, ultimately you can upstream those and you can create forks to those communities, start providing them back, and then over time you might even get commit rights to their repository to actually work in shared branches. So you have this graduated step from saying I contribute ideas to I've contributed the idea and a potential fix to, well, now you trust me, let me into your community. And there's a very governed pathway towards that.
Yeah, and it's interesting on your presentation slide. You've got some stuff here on the top left. I think the Git port for the mainframe has been around for a little while, and I've seen quite a few very good use cases. I noticed in the chat earlier, someone also mentioned Ziggy, the ISPF front end to Git. If you really are comfortable with ISPF, but you have to use Git, then there you go. Someone's written an answer to the question. But while we were talking the other night, you were mentioning about these ports for Vim and Bash. Talk a little bit more about that, if you don't mind. On why is that important to have Vim and Bash on the mainframe when I've got highlight for what are those editors? iShell. I can go in. What's wrong with it?
Yeah, you don't want to get me started on iShell. So I spend quite a lot of my time. I'm kind of the level 3 support at IBM for ZOWE. ZOWE is very, very popular. I'm not just here to big up ZOWE, but ZOWE's been kind of embedded by lots of products, and Broadcom have done a huge amount, promoting it with their customers, and it doesn't always work first time. So I spend a lot of my time with customers, literally on a WebEx or a Teams or a Zoom call, helping them bring ZOWE up. And every day's a school day. I'm always learning. And often I'll say to them, can I go and look at this file? So it's running on the Unix system services. So we have a lot of Node and we have a lot of Java within ZOWE. And then we have a lot of, and those rely on XML files, JSON files. The logs are wide when you look at the JESSpool, because you get error messages written by sort of Apache, Spring, Apache Tomcat or things. And within ZOWE, we have a YAML file, a markup file, and it's quite important to edit that file and make sure it's correct. And I see people going to ISPF, I think it's ISPF 3.17, where you enter like a USS path and they edit it. And it's just a bunch of green on black. And if you make a mistake, like you think a line is commented when it's not, or uncommented, or YAML's very sensitive about things being, at 2, 4, 6, 8, the indentation level, if you get it wrong, it just balks. So what Vim, for example, so my preferred way is to get a Visual Studio Code plugin called the ZOWE Explorer, which gives you really good direct access, and then it's just really good for working with YAML. It's also very good for working with things like Python as well. It just eats those syntax, highlights them, validates them, gives you those early errors. But if you're looking at iShell or OMVS Edit or ISPF 3.17 or like VI, which I think is possibly available on the Unix system services, it doesn't give you any of those benefits. Whereas if you take the Vim port, and it's quite straightforward, I think ZOS Open Tools, just Google for it, then what you find is when you start editing YAML files, it colorizes it. So your comments are in green, and you can just, and it's got some really nice quick tool commands. Yeah, it's great. It's great for looking at, and there's a way as well where you can look at JESSpool, so you can get a JESSpool and just like shoot it straight off into a USS file and then just look at it, and it's really nice at rendering it and doing quick searching. And
So do you think by having these tools, it kind of softens the learning curve for someone who's coming out of?
Yeah, it does. So I talk to quite a lot of customers, and there's a lovely phrase that one of director of modernization told about open source. He said, "I want to mingle." So what he wanted to do was make the mainframe less special, so that people who didn't have that kind of like 5, 10, 15 years worth of being hazed at everybody, being told stories about, you know, spilling coffee on punch card readers and, you know, doing all that kind of, you know, debugging into the small hours. If you're familiar with non-mainframe tools, moving to the mainframe isn't quite such a steep learning curve. Yeah. So it makes it more inclusive. Sorry, Stuart.
No, I'm saying the mainframe should be just another server that you can SSH into and do your stuff, that you don't have to have all of the overhead of learning those commands that you were talking about, you know, 3 point what now?
3.17, yeah.
Good. Okay, so we've got lots of stuff on the screen, you know, products and things. Is there anything around licensing, you know, that could be a gotcha that we should watch out for?
Yes, licensing is really interesting. So I'll just preface this by saying I'm not an open source license lawyer. So before you make any purchasing decisions, etc., talk to one. And it touches to what Vaughn talked about. So there's a license, and I think it's called GPL, General Purpose License. And I think Bash is under GPL. And the really toxic thing about GPL is that if you, and I'm sure the people who came up with GPL didn't realize that this would be the kind of downstream, pollutant that they created, which if you have a package that's licensed under the general purpose license, the GPL license, and you then put that in a piece of software and then ship that software, I think it's called copyleft, where that software that you put GPL on, your GPL product within to ship it, has to also be shipped under the GPL license, right? And so what that means, for example, and that I think that might be one of the reasons why, for example, and you'd need to talk to Rocket, because Rocket really know this, because Rocket have been doing this for many, many years. But they will underwrite that license issue for you, I'm sure. So if you went to Rocket's software site and said, "Oh, I want to look at," I think they've got a bundle of open source tools. I know it's got curl in it, and curl is great when it runs under USS. They'll basically carry that for you. So they'll make sure that you're not going to fall foul of any of those licensing issues. I think it might be to do with static linking rather than dynamic linking. I don't know if anybody from Rocket on the call can correct that. Igor, you know quite a bit about this as well if you're on the call. But that's the sort of thing you have to be careful about. So the Linux Foundation favors what's called more permissive use licenses, like EPL2, Eclipse Public License 2, BSD, and MIT. So I think those are the more permissive licenses.
Fantastic. Yeah, Vaughn is putting in the chat, and you're welcome to come off mute again, Vaughn, and wade in with your SPDX statement.
I was just mentioning as an aside, SPDX, it's one of the formats in the industry out there for software bill of materials. It's really good at providing transparency to what licenses software that you're running might be using, so you can evaluate third-party license risk.
Okay, so actually Jordan's made a comment. Right, Jordan, you should now be able to unmute yourself.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, sorry. I'm using my son's account. My name is actually Igor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm the lead for the ZOWE Open Tools Initiative. Yeah, and typically we find that tools vary based on how old they are. Typically, the tools that have been written 20, 30 years ago are based on more restrictive licenses like GPL 2.0 and 3.0. But we found that the newer tools that are written in the last 5 to 10 years are using more permissive licenses like BSD, Apache. Depending on the license that they provide, It's, restricts how you can use them. But typically for tools like Bash, which are based off of GPL 3.0, as long as you're not statically linking into Bash, which I don't think anyone is, or even if that's possible, typically you're okay to use it from a user's point of view.
Fantastic.
Awesome, thanks, Igor. And just while you're off of mute,
Yes.
just coming back to a question that Stuart asked me earlier, but I answered in respect of ZOWE. If somebody does want support for the ZOS open tools, is there anything interesting there? Because that crossed my mind the other day.
So nothing I can speak to publicly as of yet, but we are working on something. So Mike Fulton, he's the one who actually started this initiative, and he's working on something in the background. So hopefully sometime soon we'll be able to share that with the broader audience. But yeah, for now we're trying to take an approach where we're leveraging the original open source communities to help us maintain our ZOS ports. So kind of take an upstream first approach where we try to get the tool building and functional on ZOS. And then as soon as we get to that point, we try to upstream our changes back to the original community. And we did that with Bash, with curl, and a few others. So that way, when there's new changes that are being added by the community, they help maintain ZOS. And the next step is to get a ZOS, an external facing ZOS machine available, so that if these tools have a CI/CD pipeline, they can then leverage this ZOS machine to make sure that any changes they introduce, they're not regressing our platform. So that's the next step that we have yet to do. But even just upstreaming our changes has helped reduce the number of regressions that are coming our way.
That's awesome. Thanks, Igor. And just because I know that I'm an IBM and talking to another IBMer, but Israel from Rocket, you posted something really interesting in the Israel. Do you want to come off mute, because you posted the link to Rocket's ports, and Rocket is a fine software vendor out there, and they have Rocket Open App Dev for Z.
Right, and that
deliver, yeah.
that is what you were describing before, right? That is supported ports for various different toolings that are available in Z. So take a look, and it gives you a list of what is supported there. I was trying to get a copy of the picture and put it out there, but that is our support for some of the open tooling, right? So just as Joe mentioned earlier, right, you can port it and work with it, and then decide you want a supported version, and then you can reach out to Rocket and they have this tooling combined into what we call Open App Dev for Z. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So Joe, I'm just going to go back to one thing that you talked about as possibly the most recent open source announcement, if it even has broken news, but I know that it is going to, and that's around Galassa. So for those people on the call that don't know, Joe and I actually, we co-chair I don't know, an organization, mainframe focused organization called GSE. And on September the 5th, we're actually going to have an event that is going to is it fair to say we're going to launch it in the open source world, Joe? The Galassa moments that everyone will look back on in 20 years' time?
We could, yeah, Galassa's. So it's interesting because there's a lot of folks, I think, on the call who would be smarter on Galassa than me. But I'd like a little bit of background behind Galassa. Okay, so I'll go from the present day backwards. So Galassa has just been, the code base was open source for a while. It's a sort of software testing tool that the word I love is shift left. I think it's called shift left testing, right? Where the earlier you can find defects, just the better life becomes, right? So you start off, if things break in production or they just break and fall over with a heap that some SME's got to analyze, that's bad and that's expensive, right? And then people don't trust you, and you end up delivering your software in much less frequently, and you're very risk averse. It's a complete opposite vector to being agile. To be agile, which is fast software releases, you have to have a really good, first of all, an automated pipeline that can just deliver it and but then you want to be able to provision systems and test it and run your regression tests without humans typing them in, because humans are error prone and expensive, right? So you want to automate it. Mainframe automated testing tools, it's difficult to then, so if you look at the open source, they've got amazing things like, Selenium and Mocha.js and things like that, which are designed for testing non-mainframe products. But when you test mainframe products that are backed by 3270 applications, or you want to create, mock data, mock VSAM files, mock TICs, TS and TDQs, or mock messages, or have an application that runs and then tests the messages that it just posted to an MQQ, that's not really available because the non-mainframe world doesn't know about all that stuff. But Galasa does. So Galasa was built internally by the IBM system test team, and then I think they open sourced it. But what they want to do now, what they wanted to do, it's a bit like the undifferentiated heavy lifting. What's basically with the mainframe, what's good for the platform is good for IBM. So IBM has contributed that now as a top level open mainframe project. And that was actually the request of other vendors who were building extensions to Galasa, who actually approached IBM and the open mainframe project and said, we really like what you've done, but it's still a closed open source. It's still like, you can participate in a democracy. So you already told me for being democratic and making political analogies. It just works well for me. You can participate in this, but you can't really influence change, right? You're still just, the ballot paper's printed for you and you have to tick what happens. You want to go behind the scenes and actually get onto the committees and, be able to influence it. And those vendors said to IBM, well, can you please actually give it to the Open Mainframe Project Foundation? And that just occurred a few weeks ago. So really looking forward to that moving forward. So it's not perceived as an IBM project, but other vendors will play in that space. Yeah. And it's cracking. Yeah, we have a thing lined up coming up soon, don't we, Stuart? I can't remember. It's in September, isn't it? It's a virtual conference. But galasa.dev, if you want to find out more, galasa.dev. Is anybody else?
September the 5th, and it will be promoted on socials as a free event to come and hear some of the use cases from people like Macro4 are going to be talking about it, and how to test on it if you're not a mainframer. So there is going to be some community sharing on what Galasa is and can do.
Yeah, and some customers as well. I think Galasa has a number of customers. Again, I'm not going to out them on the call because I'd just get in trouble if I did, but I think it's got, Matt Comer, or I think Matthew Webster might be on the call. Is there anybody who knows more about Galasa than I do? I'm sure. Who wants to add to what I said? I don't think Will Yates is on the call, unfortunately.
No, we don't have Will. So this is Matt here. It's really interesting from my perspective. So Galasa is another team at IBM to me, but we work quite closely with them. We kind of see what's going around, but it's been fascinating, the journey over the last few years. So Galasa and it's the previous incarnation of Galasa, which wasn't open source, it's been well used internally by IBM for years and extremely successful. So we rely on it for our testing of kicks and other Z products. So I'm less aware of the journey it's taken, but certainly it's the other side. It's being so well used internally. It's great to see what's happening now in the direction it's going.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So it's a kind of eat your own cooking. It sells itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it was, Joe, you were talking earlier about the Java story, and it was the advent of JUnit was quite a turning point for test automation. It was an incredibly simple toolkit, and it was almost like the tipping point that suddenly made testing a lot easier, and you could do whatever you like with it. And we certainly made a lot of use of it when we were developing a lot of our Eclipse-based tooling. And so in that spirit, I wanted to follow the same path for mainframe automation to say, let's have this, hopefully there'll be a tipping point where it'll make it very, very simple for people to write test automation. But then it's not just about that. It goes way beyond just the pure toolkit for writing the tests. It also enables you to interface and to control the backends that you're trying to test. So it goes way beyond what you just have with JUnit and brings a lot of those other aspects so you can test those mainframe applications and environments.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you, Matthew. And it also works with DB2 and MQ and stuff. So it's not, even though it was born out of
Yeah, I mean,
kicks, it works with those as well, doesn't it? Yeah.
the good thing is about its provenance that it's one of those things that rather than eating our own cooking, we're basically selling what we eat. And then it was the other way around, in that it proves of such value to us that we felt that we would share that capability.
We are, except just to be pedantic, we're not selling it. IBM contributed to the open source.
I'm just kind of using the turn of phrase.
I know you are, Matthew. Sorry. It's good. And there's one other thing, just as you were talking about testing, I just couldn't not give a shout out. There's a phenomenal other open source project called COBOL-Check.
Are you seeing my Slack display at the moment on the?
Yes, we
yeah,
can.
because I just wanted to lead you down that road there, Joe, that, you know, if people want to get involved or get a feel for what's going on, you know, on the Open Mainframe project, there are some channels in Slack for, we got Ziggy. And
so Stuart, the first thing you did was you showed me a screen of a customer saying, I can't get ZOWE working, it's broken.
Apologies. I'll move to the general one, or yeah,
no worries. I'm just looking at that, and that's Madeline Dayduck from Sega Software. Yeah, we know her well.
It was because I was actually starting one of those things that someone said, highlight under ISPF is the best editor ever, and I couldn't help but say, have you ever tried the IBM Z Open Editor? Because if highlight in ISPF is the best editor you've ever seen, then there are some alternatives on the market. So yeah, COBOL-Check, that's where you were. Did you? Yeah,
COBOL-Check's, yeah, it's an absolute corker of a product. I'll just paste into the chat COBOL-Check. So COBOL-Check's a really interesting product because it was actually built, it's very much similar to Matthew's analogy. I do love the analogy about just sell what you're eating. It's used by Bank Data. Rune Christensen from Bank Data, if any of you know him, they were relying on this tool. It was actually built by somebody else called Dave Nicolette. And it's very much, I'm not a COBOL expert. I'm probably the least smart COBOL person on this call, but in COBOL, you have a thing called procedures. And what they wanted to do was test it at the procedure level rather than the entire program level. So they've done something very clever with a new COBOL compiler where you make this, you can compile it and you can capture and play and record what goes into the procedure to test whether that unit works. So it's similar to what Matthew was talking about with JUnit, which is where you can test method by method, and you can have a sort of tear up and tear down to prepare your test case and then tear your test case down. It brings that world to COBOL. So your unit is not just your program, but your unit is your proc within your program. And again, that's open source, and more and more people are picking that up now. Yeah, I should have put that on that slide. COBOL-Check's phenomenal.
Yeah, fantastic. That also Rune's happy to talk about their experiences with COBOL-Check. So
yeah, he's coming to. We should give a plug for GSE UK. He's coming to GSE UK, isn't he, Stuart? Yeah.
Well, and while he's over, maybe we can get a Mainframers event that he could do the same thing. So there's not many questions I've seen yet. I don't know if anyone has posted any questions, but overall, before we turn to closing the day, it's pretty healthy, isn't it? You know, the open source community or the ecosystem or the mainframe is pretty healthy, isn't it? Looking at your slide.
I think it's very healthy. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very healthy. And I think what's really good about it is the number of vendors who've got behind it. Personally, I'd like to see it grow more. I'd like to see more customers engaging with the open source community. And I'd like to see, yeah, I mean, I'm always I'm glass half empty, but yeah, I think it's good. Certainly from 5 years ago or 10 years ago, definitely. I think it's good. I don't know what others think.
I think it's great. I think 5-10 years ago, Joe, people would have been saying open source on the mainframe will never happen. So it certainly shows how much has changed.
Yeah, Vaughn, people still do. I still talk to customers who say who have, and I loved your SBOM one about the Tylenol, but I still talk to some customers who say open source, you're just going to let the kind of vandals, the Visigoths, the kind of malware hordes are going to come in and just trash the whole platform. But then often you say to them, well, you're part of a bank. And then when you start asking those questions, you'll find that they're probably using, my pitch about ZOWE is I say, well, do you use Jenkins? Do you use Node.js? Do you use Mocha.js? Do you use OpenAPI, right? .js, and Swagger, right? And the chances are that that organization probably does. And you go, well, they're all open source packages ananyway.
Well, I can't imagine any organization these days that isn't using some flavor of Git for everything off host. So, I mean, ultimately, your point is very valid. I mean, open source has made it into even the most conservative of organizations. And certainly the mainframe is, a special platform. It's the system of record. So we want to treat it with a little extra caution, but at the same time, just because you're a bank doesn't mean you won't use open source. And I think the same with mainframe. We just have to look at it and make sure that we do it in a way that's sensible, that preserves the things mainframe is known for, including security. But ultimately, the productivity gains from open source and just sharing as a community they can't be overlooked.
There is a question, Joe, in the chat. Can you explain a bit about ZOWE Zebra?
Oh,
and
ZOWE
what are the
Zebra.
next steps?
Zebra, and just for our American friends, that's a zebra. Yeah, black and white striped horse. Although any zoologist, I'm sure, will tell me off because it's probably not related to a horse. So that's my attempt at evening humor. Yes. So what the Zebra project is it's about. I'm trying to think of a short answer. It's really about creating the ability to get monitoring records very quickly, because RMF and SMF are kind of gawpy and very mainframey, to get those into a format that you can very easily start to use to render in products like Splunk or Grafana or some of the more. So in this diagram, I've got VS Code and Jenkins and Tecton. You can imagine in the monitoring space that the non-mainframe people in an organization are probably using something like Splunk, or they're using something like Grafana to sort of render that in a dashboard, or perhaps they're even more advanced and they're using some sort of AI tool to actually pipe that in and start building up a sort of corpus of knowledge about what to do next, right? With all of that information. So what Zebra was about initially, and it was created by a contribution from Vicom Infinity, was all about, let's open source that ability to get RMF and SMF just up into an API that we could just query and just get some JSON objects back, and then we could pipe into these upstream dashboards. Right now, it's still an incubator project in ZOWE. It hasn't matured, and one of the reasons it hasn't matured is because there's another standard called OTel, Open Telemetry something, I think it's called. And again, I'm not the expert on this, and that's an open source standard, I think, about getting log and trace and metrics data in a standard way, so that you can have this blending of these all of these tools, the Grafana and Elastic, and there's other ones as well, and then all of these different backends feeding in. I don't know, Matthew Webster, you might know more about OTel than me, but that's one of the reasons why we're now de-emphasizing Zebra, and we're actually moving more towards OTel as being the future. I don't know if anybody else can talk about that. So, but it's one of the good things about open source. Some things thrive and some things die.
Yeah.
I know nothing about it.
Oh, sorry, Matthew. But
Sorry, I don't know anything.
But Google for OTel. I know, I don't want to out any vendors. I know there are vendors on this call who are looking quite closely at OTel as being the. So my guess is that in the monitoring space, Stuart, you're at BMC. BMC are a huge vendor in the monitoring space. In the monitoring space, my prediction for the future in 5 years' time is what you'll do is that everybody will, the mainframe will just be piping OTel data back up, right? All of its traces, all of its logs. Nobody's going to be talking about SMF anymore. There'll be some open source tooling that does all of that. And then the vendors will have their best of breed monitoring products, the sys views, the main views, the Omegamons, and so forth. Will just be taking that data and then rendering that along with distributed data to give you that view. And hopefully as well with the smart vendors, they'll have some AI tools on top, sort of crunching that, giving suggestions.
I thought with ChatGPT, I'd be saying, "Hey Siri, is my system up?" And or she'll tell me, "Stuart, your system is failing. Please log on now. You're in trouble." So there's the future is definitely pretty interesting around lots of stories genuinely that I'm hearing about AI helping with predicting that storage is running out because it's finding unusual behavior, learns what normal is and then sees abnormal stuff. So Matt is desperately posting a question: has the Open Mainframe project had any uptake interest from universities teaching the next gen of software engineers?
Yes, absolutely. My goodness, I'm sorry I haven't mentioned that. Yes. So the future, and you mentioned at the start about this, people leaving the platform and who are going to be the stewards of the platform going forward. So yes, the biggest success that ZOWE ever had was because at the start of the pandemic, I remember leaving, I think it was Dallas Fort Worth. It was like Share about March 2020. I think we all legged it home from there literally about a week before the pandemic started. And then basically everything went pear-shaped for the world. And I think it was Phil Murphy, who's the governor of New Jersey, maybe, ended up making some comment when all of his government systems were stressed, saying, "Oh my goodness, we can't handle it, COBOL's broken." And everybody mucked in. And the Open Mainframe project actually created a COBOL training course. And their COBOL training course, because they're part of the Linux Foundation, they kind of got blessed by various governments and wanting to create a next generation of COBOL developers. That happened to include the ZOWE Explorer VS Code plugin. And the number of downloads went up in a week from 800 to 8,000 literally overnight. And all of those courses basically ended up becoming, then at the same year, IBM, the Master the Mainframe course, which taught mainframers to mainframe skills for the first 15 years, taught people using ISPF and SDSF and TSO commands. That pivoted in 2020 as well to be using the VS Code ZOWE Explorer extension and some ZOWE command line interface extensions that came out of what was then Brightside at Broadcom that they contributed. And that massively grew the number of users. And then, we hit 20,000, 30,000, and we're giving out 25,000 user IDs a year. And if you go onto LinkedIn, if you follow Dr. Cameron CA, who's really active, phenomenal, teaches HBCUs, East Carolina University and beyond, he's a big proponent of ZOWE. I was in Oslo just a month ago, Gemanis Samanik, University of Vilnius in Lithuania. And what they're telling us is that all of the courses where they include ZOWE and ZOWE Explorer, first of all, it's more familiar to people because I don't come into the classroom and see a green screen and just run away and say, oh my goodness. It looks familiar, it looks simple, but also some of them as well, we're seeing on the IBM Z Explorer, some of those students want to get credits for contributing to an open source community. So there's menteeships where students are not just using open source software, but they're contributing it back. And then even some of the companies are hiring those because they get Creditly badges and they get GitHub points and things like that. So it's a cracking two-way system, Stuart. Yeah, thanks for that question.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, it is. And Cameron's been big in the US, hasn't he? And of course, we've got Herb Daly in the UK doing a lot of great stuff around Wolverhampton that he's currently at, isn't he?
University of Wolverhampton, Herb is at,
So there's some interesting stuff there. Angie's also talking about OpenTelemetry.io is a
CNCF Cloud Native Computing Platform. Yeah, thanks for that, Angie. Yeah, definitely if you're into, that's my follow-up for the Zebra. Yeah, that's OTel is really exciting in the monitoring space. But yeah, education is really important. We've got to make the platform, is one of ZOWE's founding things. When we had our very first design camp, design, you got to come up with 3 things only: open, simple, familiar, right? Open source. Yeah, we nailed that. Got to make the platform familiar to people. And education is so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've actually got an interesting weird reverse story, Stuart, about education. I remember where a customer was telling me, who I visited, that they hired somebody who said he wanted to work in the mainframe department, and then came in and it was all Visual Studio Code, and they were using, you talked about IBM Z Open Editor. I think they were using Ansible, they were using Python to do their CI/CD, they were using Jenkins. And this particular person went back to their manager after a week or two and said, I thought I was in the mainframe department. And it was like, yeah, you are. And he said, but it all looks really modern, because their perception of mainframes was, you know, from watching Hollywood movies and things, it was all, you know, green ones and zeros across the screen, and, you know, panels, and, you know, people smoking cigarettes in rooms with lots of piles of punch cards and things. So in a strange, ironic way, he was using he was a mainframer without ever touching any of what he had perceived the mainframes to be.
And I've got a similar story that I was doing business in Japan and doing the whole mainframe tool chain, you know, of how it's just another server. Put a slide up and the guy said, I thought we were talking mainframe, but you've just shown me all my distributed tools. And it's like, yeah, why, you know, COBOL is just another syntax. You don't need to worry about the interface. So that's the really good stuff. And Matt, the innovation genius that he is, he's asking the community whether people on the call will be interested in rapid demo kind of thing, or just demos. I've added the word rapid, but, you know, having a Mainframers event where some of these tools get demoed so that people can get an idea of what they look like and what the potential return on the investment of exploring them on their mainframe systems would be. I think that's definitely worth exploring. So what I've done is I've gone back to the Mainframers presentation. There's a calendar. Is anyone from the organizational team from Mainframers want to come off mute and talk about the calendar?
Hello. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. Yes, so we publicly available, and what we've done is we've did some upcoming events, so they'll be from some of the mainframe associations we all know and love. So outside of the Mainframers group, we have GSE and Share coming up at the later half of this year. And so, yeah, basically it will be a calendar that you can browse freely through your internet browser, or you can add it to Outlook or your Google Calendar Reader. And as we're adding, it'll pop up and update. Anyone who's hosting an event and would like us to add, please feel free to pass a message.
So that just killed Angie's internet connection. However, I hope that you got a sense of it's a calendar, and it's going to have different events that you can maybe keep checking on to see what's next. And to Matt's point around, do you want to see demos in upcoming events? Then there's a survey to be completed. So if should we put this in the chat? How about, would that work? No, it's not. Let's see, is it a picture? Or is it really something? I'm just going to look at the slide that I've got for it. Let's kill that. Come on, PowerPoint. No, Sam, have you got the slide to, you can cut and paste the URL for the thing to the chat?
I've put it in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Beth.
That's right.
So yeah, if those of you that are still here, if you could fill out that, and I guess we should promote this on the Slack channel for people that didn't catch it, to see what else they'd like to see on the upcoming events. One thing I do promise is that there will be younger people doing the presentation, the event next time, more hair, perhaps more colour to their hair. And Joe is a big proponent of diversity, so it won't just be two old blokes nattering away on a Thursday afternoon in England. Has anyone got any final questions to take advantage of the opportunity
Stuart,
to? Yes.
Can I just share my screen for
Go on.
So, Angie, who was on just now, unfortunately, her Wi-Fi wasn't quite up to it, but she's been doing a lot of work behind the scenes to put together a calendar that just gives the Mainframers community ability to see what events are coming up throughout the year. So the idea is that there is a calendar that anyone will be able to access. It's a Google calendar. Anyone will be able to access and add other mainframe related events too. So there are a few things that have been seeded. So we run a bi-weekly planning meeting for this event. We've got Share there, we've got GSE there. So the idea is to make something available to the community to see what's coming up. I don't know how much you could hear from what Angie shared, but she's put some instructions in terms of how to make use of that, how to contribute to that. And basically the invite is there to everyone to make this, to get the most useful information on there. We need everyone's help. So it's like a crowdfunded thing. If you are aware of events that you would like to let people know about that are mainframe related, come and use this. So there's some instructions, and we'll make sure that those instructions are shared in the chat here and then on our Slack channel.
Okay, so we do have a question, and from Vivek. The way cloud have IaaS, for example, infrastructure service can be spinned as a service in future. Can we have something like LPAR as a service where we can spin an LPAR in any geography? So I think, well, the answer is yes. There are quite a lot of opportunities. I know we keep plugging GSE, but that's where, when we do a call for papers, we're getting quite a lot of the future stuff being sent to us as abstracts. So there's a company called Ecox that are containerizing test environments. There's a company called Pop-Up Mainframe that is allowing you to have ZD&T instances in your cloud provider so that you can have short-lived mainframe environments. You can get code on it. And I know that tools from BMC and Broadcom actually allow you to get code onto those environments. So there's lots of ephemeral solutions. IBM are moving the ZD&T into, Joe, remind me, what's the new
WAS as a service?
Well, oh yeah, I wasn't thinking about WAS as a service. I was thinking that there's the other DT thing now, isn't there?
So ZD&T is basically an emulated ZOWE software stack. Yeah, it comes out of, I think the provenance of that actually is that there's actually an environment called ZPDT. So I'm just an IBMer, so I'm just going to start like splurting acronyms here, which is actually used by Poughkeepsie to early test software before they build the hardware for it. ZD&T then adds other things on top, like, probably Kix and MQ and DB2 and stuff that you would actually need to bring it up. Then what you can always just get that, right? License it, run it on any Intel machine. It can't run production workload. It's not licensed to, and it's not really fast enough to, but it's good for testing, which is where the D&T test comes along. What's really nice now with cloud and public cloud is that you can provision that in a cloud, public cloud. But what some very smart people have done is they basically ported that to the Linux environment. And I think with WAS as a service is, I think as a public cloud, I'm probably going to get in trouble for divulging something that maybe IBM hasn't released, or maybe it's already been out there for 3 years. But the WAS as a service lets you basically publicly provision that environment, but it's actually backed by Z-Linux. So it's running under a Talon chip, right? So you don't get this double, because Java is not a compiled language. Like a Java file compiles to a .class file, which is once run anywhere. So it's like a P code, which is optimized by JITs, just-in-time compilers, which makes ZD&T very slow, right? Because you've got Java interpreted running on Intel. So it's kind of almost like a sequential instruction set, whereas it's more optimized once it's run under the Z-Linux environment. I think that VM just basically just runs like the bejesus. But I'm pretty sure
the one I was thinking about was the ZVDT, the
VDT,
IBM virtual dev and test.
You may have acronymed me on IBM acronyms. I don't know. Is there an IBM product manager on the call or not? I know there's something called. No,
I think this is the version of WASI that you run in your own cloud. This is the on-prem version of
private cloud. Yeah.
Yeah, of WASI. But anyway, Vivek, lots and lots of solutions.
Yeah.
We are becoming much more like the cloud teams that you can spin up a test environment, do whatever you want, and then spin it down once you've captured the results and things. So it's definitely a growth area. The fact that a few years ago, it was, as Joe was saying, ZD&T. I remember Joseph Tapp Atkins showed me a rack that was running it, and now you had to have a dongle, and now you can have so many different options. It's a fast-growing environment, Vivek.
It is, and it's quick. And I think Igor just posted as well that ZD&T. Here we are, Brian. ZVDT is ZD&T running natively on Z. Wow. Thank you. So you were right. Thanks, Brian. Yeah. So I guess ZD&T is the Intel, x86 architecture, whereas the ZVDT is the kind of Z-Linux architecture of the same thing. So I guess you could run it on-prem, or certainly WAS as a service runs it in the cloud. And what Igor did, which is really interesting, that whole kind of, if we want to make it so that the Node community, so Node on ZOS, right? Node is created by the Node.js community, but Node on ZOS, you have to wait. If you guys have followed it, like Node 18's out there, but the community moves forward, right? So what you really want is you want day one versions of languages like Node or so you want those communities to have all of the source code available. So everything gets upstreamed by ZOS tools, or IBM being part of Node or Python or Golang, upstreaming all of their native stuff. But then those native communities have to be able to have a ZOS environment provisioned so that they can do CI/CD, right? And get their gold PI badges. And then what's happening is WAS as a service is being used to provide to those communities. That's the end destination of that, right? So then IBM has to do less special stuff, and everybody can have like day one ports and day one language environments. So it goes full circle back to open source. There we go.
There you go. On that bombshell, let's just thank everyone on the Mainframers committee that have helped put this together. So appreciate the work everyone puts into to make this look so seamless. And Joe, thank you very much. See you soon. Vaughn, definitely see you in November at the GSE event, where you'll be talking about some similar stuff. Very excited to always meet mainframers virtually and physically. So that calendar is going to be incredibly useful for what's upcoming around the world for the mainframe environment. Never a dull. What did you say? Every day's a school day, Joe?
Every day's a school day. Yeah, I mean, I may, Dorian Gray, I look older every day, but hanging around with mainframers, literally, I feel younger every day. It's a pleasure.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much, everyone. And that definitely is a bombshell. We'll leave it there. Cool. Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Matt. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye, everyone.